Hi everyone, my name is Ciara McLaughlin and I'm the current chairperson of Trinity's Free Legal Advice Centre. You're all very welcome to our first event of the year, Consent on Campus. We'll be running all our weekly social justice talks online this year, and they will be pre-recorded in order to best facilitate our members and to try and reach as many people as possible. So we've seen a lot in the media as of late about gender-based violence and sexual harassment in third-level institutions. So we felt it was particularly important to run a panel discussion on this at the beginning of this new academic year. The questions we have to ask are: why is sexual assault so prevalent on college campuses, and what can we do to change this? We have a brilliant lineup of speakers on our panel today. Firstly, Mary Crilly. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Sexual Violence Centre Cork. Secondly, Hayley Mulligan. She is the Violence Against Women Officer at the National Women's Council. And finally, Dr. Louise Crowley. She is a Senior Lecturer of Family Law at the School of Law in UCC. I want to sincerely thank all our speakers for participating in this event and for furthering the conversation on consent.
My name is Mary Crilly, with the Sexual Violence Centre in Cork. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to take part in the discussion about consent. When I think about consent, I think about age groups. I think about consent really should start in primary school or kindergarten, where children should learn about consent, and all up through the schools. I think it should be part of who they are, part of what they are, part of the belief system. It should just be ingrained in society. Because I do believe by the time students get to third level, PLCs, colleges, CITs or whatever, it's ingrained. The reality of how we treat each other is just ingrained, and it's very difficult to change beliefs then, but not impossible. I know you're all going to be hearing about consent classes. I know in the next few years in every university, every college, consent classes will be in place, will be mandatory. And it is important, even just to raise awareness about sexual violence. It is happening in our society, in Ireland. The last survey, which was done quite a number of years ago, showed that 1 in 5 girls are abused in this country as children, and 1 in 7 boys are abused in this country as children. As adults, 1 in 5 girls will be raped or sexually assaulted. It is a higher figure for men who are sexually assaulted. Men have more chance of getting a head kicked in than getting sexually assaulted, but it still does happen. And in February the 14th, which I know is Valentine's Day, it's also V-Day, and V-Day kind of highlights the fact that there's 3 billion women in the world, and 1 billion will be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime. And some of you are in college, some of you are in schools, and that's where we need to start all the consent stuff in schools at a very earlier age. But for those who have been raped or sexually assaulted, please talk to someone. Even if it's just to say this happened to me, even just get some kind of acknowledgement from somebody else that they're really sorry this happened. And if somebody comes to you and says this happened to them, they're not really looking for you to give them all the cures, all the know-how, all the information. They just want you to look them in the eye and kind of say, I'm really sorry this happened to you. And again, I'll go back to who they want to tell. They will come into a centre like ours if they just can't deal with the situation anymore, if they feel they can't cope, if they feel their life is kind of going upside down, if they feel the memories are getting too much for them and they can't sleep and they can't eat, if they're blaming themselves for not being over it because it might have happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they have this belief that they should be over it by now because that's what we're told, because the perpetrator has minimised it. The perpetrator might be attending their home every day. He might be their brother's best friend. He might be somebody. He might be a woman recently who we met who was raped by her best friend's husband, and she'd nobody to talk to. She'd nobody to turn to. And this is what they do. They go very close to home and they'll do it to people who they know won't report it. So if it did happen to you, please talk to someone, either a friend who you can say it to, or a centre, or somebody, just so you know it isn't your fault. It is never your fault. And I can see young people in front of me saying, but it is Mary, and I don't know if he knew what he was doing. I've even heard that from families of victims who've come in, whose daughters or sons might have been sexually assaulted, and they're really furious about the guy who did it. But because that guy happened to be a friend of theirs for years and nearly grew up with them, they'll kind of say to me, but he's a nice lad. And you know what, Mary, I don't think he knew what he was doing. But you know what? He did know what he was doing. And by this conversation all the time, this constant kind of defending the perpetrator, we're keeping it going. We're tolerating it. We're allowing it. We're not calling it out. And we're leaving all these people who struggle, again, to be with people. Most girls who come in for counselling will come in because they say they've met a really nice guy or a really nice girl or whoever, and they can't have a relationship with them because the memories of what happened to them are too strong. And the boyfriends come in and they want to help in whatever way they can. And that's how it affects people. It's not just a month off. It's not just one night and sure, I'll be sore or I'll feel bad for a few days and then it's gone. It affects our relationships, it affects everything. And then especially for guys who are raped, because very often as men, as people, as human beings, they don't know who they are anymore. The girls at least will most feel if they are attracted to men, they're still attracted to them, they still want to have relationships. But men sometimes when they're raped, as a being, they don't know who they are anymore. So it is that serious. So he just needs to stop it and call it out and just say this isn't happening. We talk about rape, we talk about rape culture. It's a word that's kind of bandied around, but it is about misinterpretations. It is about a girl being blamed for rape. It is about kind of saying if somebody's drunk, she was asking for it. It is about continuing this stuff about whatever somebody wore is important and matters. It is about this awful myth that women say no when they really mean yes. And where there's lots of false allegations, there's something like 1% of allegations haven't been confirmed or false allegations, call it that. Only 1% of the whole lot, because I can guarantee you people will not go through what they have to go through to report or to even deal with it in their daily life if it didn't happen. They won't tell their friends. And from working in an organisation nearly 40 years, the friends are the people they want to tell. You're the people they want to tell, but they feel you won't believe them, or they feel you say to them, why did you go there? Why did you go back? I mean, there's a lot of students' parties on, not so many now, but COVID, but it is normal to gather together, to gather in groups, to have parties, to have fun. And so why is somebody who's raped, why is she particularly asked, why did you go there? 100 people might have gone there, 80 people might have gone there, one perpetrator went there. A lot of other guys went there for a party to have fun, maybe to get off with someone, but he didn't go there to rape, but still is the victim who's blamed for what happens. I think if you ask girls, do they know, many of them know somebody who's been raped. I say the majority would know somebody who's either been fondled, who's been touched, who's been groped, who's been asked something, who's been harassed. They'll know them. Ask a guy the same question, he probably won't know. Or ask him how many people he know who's sexually assaulted somebody, and he won't know. But if you ask him a different question, and many guys have kind of pushed as far as they can go, even when a girl says no, the majority will know somebody. And what I'm saying is we need to change that language, because that is rape. Pushing somebody when they say no is rape. Interfering with somebody in any kind of way when they're drunk is sexual assault. Interfering with anybody who's on any kind of medication and can't agree to consenting is rape. There's no way around it. And you can do what they do in court, and you can bring down the victim. You can discredit her and say she was drunk, she was whatever. And that's still not getting away from the problem that there is somebody out there who's raping, and he'll continue to do it. We also have a campaign called Fixed It, where we kind of look at headlines in the paper and change them. You could have something like 15-year-old girl in a hotel room had sex with 6 men. I mean, my God, that's appalling kind of language. But if we allow that to continue, then it gets ingrained in us into believe that a 16-year-old is having sex and a 16-year-old is raped. There was a court case there yesterday where the person who raped a young girl, she was underage when it happened, sobbed in court when he was found guilty. And the headlines were, a man sobbed in court. And what was that about? Getting a lot of sympathy for him, where in fact it should have been a man convicted of raping an underage in his own apartment. So we have to keep changing things and looking at things and not accepting it, not accepting the reality of kind of nights out where you see young men grabbing a girl, grabbing parts of her body because they felt like, because they thought it was fun. And then if she decided this isn't fun, she's a prude, we have to stop that. That's not on, it's not appropriate. And I think we just have had enough and we just need to stop it. And we have a really amazing opportunity and window to do it now, because consent is coming in. It's coming in from the minister, is coming in from the students' union, is coming in from college presidents, is coming in now where the backup and support that should have been there all along hopefully will be there. And we want to be with you because we really believe that young people have so much energy. I love the way you take stuff on, and if you decide to take it on, it's done. I mean, and that has been proven in the past few years. And you see, what I think about young people is I think you're invincible. I think you're incredible. I think you did amazing things in the past two amendments. You've done lots of changes in Ireland and Irish society in the past number of years, and you can do this too. I mean, there has to be zero tolerance. We have to stop victim blaming. We have to look at who's doing it, look at kind of rape as a crime, and take the sex out of it. Just look at it about consent. The girl said no, and she knows she said no. There's no way you believed she said yes, you know she said no. So we need to look at it as the crime it is and treat it as such.
Hi, my name is Hayley Mulligan and I work for the National Women's Council. My role within the National Women's Council is the Violence Against Women Officer. As such, I am chair of the National Advisory Committee that seeks to end sexual harassment and violence in higher education. I'd like to first of all thank FLAC for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel discussion. I think that this is such a worthwhile discussion. It is broad, it is complex, and there is a huge amount of work to be done within this sector, but also within society more generally. So really, in this brief discussion, I'm going to use the term sexual violence. I'm using it as an umbrella term that captures a range of non-consensual behaviours such as rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, image-based abuse, stalking, and these are all forms of gender-based violence. We must frame sexual harassment and violence within the gendered context because failing to do so will fail to really get to the root of what is at the centre of sexual harassment and violence. So really, the gender perspective is clear. The international data is clear that the single biggest factor of being a victim of sexual violence is gender. That 8 out of 10 victims of sexual assault are women in Europe. In the recent sexual experiences survey, 29% of respondents were women who had experienced non-consensual penetration, otherwise known as rape. 28% were non-binary and 10% were men. After gender, age is a significant risk factor, with women between the ages of 18 to 28 being the most at risk. Also, disability is a significant risk factor. Again, the sexual experiences survey found that 40% of women reported non-consensual penetration. These statistics are alarming, but they also tally very closely to the international picture of sexual violence. The NAC works by dividing the work into 3 work streams. So the first one is on research and data collection. This is a crucially important aspect of tackling sexual violence within higher education, because if we don't have a clear picture of what's going on, then our initiatives and our targeted initiatives will not be in the right place. So it is so important that we get a picture of overall the prevalence of sexual violence within higher education. And thankfully, Minister Harris has committed to undertaking a survey, and this should be annually. And I think he has recognised that and fully supports that, which is so wonderful to see. We also need to be able to assess whether the interventions are actually working. And this is, again, so important because there is no neutral view on this. Either institutions are ignoring the problem, which means that they are sustaining the problem, or they're addressing the problem. And we need to be able to see how and whether the measures that have taken are actually effective. Ireland recently signed and ratified the Istanbul Convention that ends sexual harassment, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence against women. And this calls for disaggregated data. So it's not just good enough that we have data, we need this data to be disaggregated. And we are so glad to see that a number of institutions have signed up to and are implementing the support and report tool, which is an online tool that institutions will use where students and staff will be able to report instances of sexual violence. So we welcome that, and any institution that is interested in in availing of this software, then they should definitely contact me, and I'll put them in contact with whoever will be able to help them on that as well. The second work stream is policies. We know that there are significant gaps in policy, if not policies that are completely unworkable. Very often sexual harassment falls under dignity and respect policies, but what we see across the sector is that institutions are moving towards having specific sexual violence or sexual harassment or sexual misconduct policies, and this shows the complexities of the issues. It can address the issues. All policies need to be trauma informed. They need to be based in human rights. They need to be victim survivor centered, and they need to be intersectional. So having great policies is one thing. We also need to see how they are implemented and whether they're actually working for students and staff who unfortunately have been subjected to sexual violence. So we are really glad to support and to see the HEA, the Higher Education Authority, have produced templates for reporting on implementing of policies. And then hopefully with better data collection, we'll be able to see what effect these policies have actually had in holding perpetrators to account, which is so significantly important, because unfortunately we have seen that the numbers of official reports or unofficial reports are incredibly low and do not tally anywhere near the prevalence rates. So if people, students and staff, are not using policies, then the policies are not fit for purpose. So the NAC is working together to produce best practice guidelines for implementing these policies and actually reviewing policies, and to see if they're actually doing what they're meant to be doing. So obviously the work ahead is long and it is going to be hard, but definitely what we can see is that there is real movement within the whole sector towards having policies that actually work for survivors. Prevention initiatives as well, changing the culture, and this is very strong within the national framework, the need to change the culture within higher education institutions. There are a number of intervention programs that are underway, and thankfully Minister Harris has stated that these should be mandatory for all incoming first years. Now, obviously intervention programs very much focus on student experiences of sexual violence. But what we really need to understand is that this is not just an issue for students, it's also an issue for staff as well. But we welcome all initiatives because really they are a brilliant way to start the conversation. And there are signs in the research that they do actually help with awareness raising around where to seek support and what policies are actually in place, which of course are so welcome. But we must be mindful that intervention programs cannot just focus, or should never focus, on reducing the risk of victimization. They must and they should focus on the risk of perpetration. And we know from research, international research, that the number one individual risk factor for perpetration is the acceptance of rape myths. It's a lack of empathy for women. It's hostility towards women. It's adherence to rigid gender norms. From a community perspective, the community risk factors include lack of effective deterrence. So where policies are not working and students or staff, perpetrators, do not feel that they will be held to account, or fear of being held to account, is a significant risk factor. The promotion, endorsement, ignoring or tolerating of rape culture. Rape culture is characterized by a lack of belief in victim survivors, while perpetrators' behaviors are excused and justified. We know that this is present in our society and unfortunately is present within higher education institutions, within the culture. It is within the ether. It is sometimes euphemistically being called lad culture, which adheres to sexist beliefs, excessive drinking and violence. And unless we tackle perpetration, then really prevention is going to be minimal, which is obviously the goal, is to ensure that nobody is subjected to sexual violence. Sexual violence is rooted and maintained in inequalities that shape behaviours, beliefs and norms. This is where the conversation must begin. This is where the conversation must remain. And this is where our whole thinking must be incorporated around the inequalities that produce sexual violence and that allow perpetrators to not be held accountable for their actions. Again, I'd like to thank you. And if you have any questions, then please do feel free to contact me.
Hello, my name is Louise Crowley. I'm a lecturer in the School of... Hello, my name is Louise Crowley. I'm a lecturer in the School of Law in UCC, and I am the director of the Bystander Intervention program at UCC. We developed the program in 2016, and we piloted it with law students for the first year. The aim of the program was to develop across UCC an educational evidence-based initiative which would provide a forum for students to start conversations about the issue of sexual harassment and violence, and to better understand what unacceptable behaviour looks like, and to have the capacity to discuss this with their peers whilst developing skills of intervention to be able to play a part in ending sexual harassment and violence at third level. Unfortunately, the need for the development of this programme and other related programmes across the country is very stark. The 2020 Student Experience Survey tells us how stark it is, and the statistics that we can read from that survey are quite horrific. It appears that the majority of students experience sexual hostility on a regular basis, and it has almost become an expected part of university life. And we need a capacity and the education to put an end to this. And this is the motivation behind creating education-based responses, but it's also the reason why we chose bystander intervention, because through empowering all members of the campus community to act as pro-social bystanders in respect of unacceptable and unwanted advances in the context of sexual harassment and violence, we can together effect cultural change. The UCC Bystander Intervention Initiative was developed based on the toolkit that was created by my colleague, Dr. Rachel Fenton, then of the University of West England. Dr. Fenton had been funded by Public Health England to create a toolkit that universities across the UK could utilise to develop bystander intervention programmes. Dr. Fenton kindly allowed us to rely upon this toolkit within the Irish jurisdiction, but to modify it for the Irish and indeed the UCC audience. We did this for 2 years, in 2016 and 2017, and we delivered in-class workshops to law students, nursing and midwifery students, and applied psychology students. The 2-year pilot programme proved to be incredibly successful in terms of impact. The student experience was overwhelmingly positive. The students were of the view that everyone in UCC could and should take the opportunity to take the bystander intervention programme and share in the learning and the collective response. In order to upscale the programme, we transitioned it to online delivery, and this was launched in January 2019. And just yesterday, we launched a new updated version of our UCC Bystander Intervention blended learning programme. There are many key learnings contained throughout the 4 modules that are delivered online. However, to highlight a few, bystander intervention and being an effective bystander relies upon 4 elements. The first is that a person sees something happening. So they may not, or typically are not directly involved, but they see an incident. And the second element is that they understand that there is something not right, that there is something unacceptable about the behaviour or the incident that they are witnessing. The third element is that they feel responsibility. So whilst they are a bystander and not a party to the incident, they feel a responsibility to act in some way to respond to what they have seen. And then the fourth key element is the capacity to make a safe and effective intervention. So these 4 components must exist in order for an intervention to be made. And another key learning for students is the issue of intervention inhibition. And this is something that we have all experienced when we see something happening and for some reason we choose not to intervene. There are 5 reasons basically why people may be inhibited from intervening, and they do include, for example, fear of retaliation, the fear that you might yourself be physically harmed, or some other type of retaliation, which could include social rejection. Inability to recognize yourself or connect with the people involved. But the biggest problem in the context of recognizing and reacting to troublesome and unacceptable sexual harassment and violence is pluralistic ignorance. And this is the difficulty that arises from the normalization of sexual harassment and violence. And so in the Bystander Intervention program, we discuss social norms with the students, and we do ask them about how they might react to certain situations, and equally how they feel their peers might react to similar situations. And our own research tells us, and it reflects international research, that people are more likely to be, or to say that they would object to behaviour, but feel that their peers would be less likely to do so. So there is a shared sense amongst young people that they are more likely to feel uncomfortable about unwanted advances, rape jokes, unacceptable comments, unacceptable sending of images through social media or otherwise, than their peers would be. And this places an inhibition on people to speak up because they fear they will be the lone objector. And through the fora and through the online learning, students taking the Bystander Intervention program realize that they are in fact not alone, that they are surrounded by people who are equally appalled by the behaviour that they see and what they hear, but that they do feel that they may be alone. They don't have the confidence to believe that if they speak up, they will be supported. So it highlights for us the importance of identifying in the course of the program what unacceptable behaviour looks like, and to give students the capacity, which we do through various online tools, to share their disgust and to have this shared with other people taking the program. The result of this is a recognition of the shared abhorrence of this behaviour, and it instills a bravery and a willingness amongst the participants to speak up, knowing that the feelings are shared. And the importance of more people taking the program is that it will give rise to cultural change across campuses, where you have a collective of understanding of the impact of effective interventions and the importance of the shared collective objective voice to call out unacceptable behaviour, to speak to perpetrators, to speak to those people who are behaving in such a way that it is not acceptable. And we need to do this in respect of all forms of unacceptable behaviour. So the comments and the unwanted advances that are happening on a regular basis, these will escalate into more horrific and more violent behaviour if it's not called out. We know this will happen. And so we call on students and we call on society to recognise in the first place what red flags look like, what unacceptable behaviour looks like, but then also to have the skills to act in a safe and effective way. And this is the other element of the Bystander Intervention training. At the end of the 4 modules online, students participate in a 1-hour in-person workshop where they share their learning experience with colleagues and peers who have also taken the programme. And this is a wonderful opportunity to reflect on the learning and to have a shared recognition of the capacity of the people within that room and the people across campus to make a difference, to demand a zero tolerance, and to be a part of the cultural change that brings about a safer campus and a better and more positive learning experience for all of our students. And when students graduate, they are part of the broader society, and as graduates with this learning and with these capacities can feed into the broader society. So we do believe that educational targeted initiatives are hugely important to educating and empowering our students. And we believe that the Bystander Intervention programme not only provides the knowledge and the learning, but it also empowers our students and gives them the strength and the capacity to be that difference on campus and with their friends. And it destigmatizes the conversation. So the more students who take the Bystander Intervention programme, they become more aware of the issues, they better understand to a point the experience of people who've been traumatized by sexual harassment and violence. And interventions, of course, do not just happen before an event or in anticipation of an event or in the duration of an event, but they also happen after the event. And being able to receive disclosures from a friend or a peer who has come to you having been sexually harassed, having been raped, having been sexually assaulted, that is also a key intervention albeit after the fact. And so all of these skills are hugely significant and important in supporting victim survivors of sexual harassment and violence, but also playing a part in, as so far as we can, to addressing unwanted advances, unacceptable behaviour, and calling it out so that we can put an end to sexual harassment and violence amongst third level students. So I encourage you to look into the Bystander Intervention programme, and if your university has engaged with UCC, we are rolling this out in 10 institutions across Ireland, supported by the Department of Education, and hope to reach out to the rest of the institutions in the coming academic year. We would love for other universities to deliver this training to their students so that collectively, across Ireland, we can all proudly play a part in ending sexual harassment and violence. Thank you.